Imagine standing on the edge of a small, muddy river. Behind you is everything you know. In front of you is treason, civil war, and the potential to rule the known world. For 500 years, the Roman Republic had stood as a beacon of shared power, governed by a fierce, cultural hatred of kings. Yet one man, standing on the banks of the Rubicon River, was about to tear it all down. He did not use foreign armies to destroy Rome. He used Rome's own legions. He was a brilliant general, a ruthless politician, a charismatic populist, and perhaps the greatest narcissist of the ancient world. His name has become synonymous with absolute power itself. This is the story of Gaius Julius Caesar, the man who murdered a republic to become a god. To understand how a single man could dismantle the greatest superpower of its day, we have to look at his beginnings. Caesar was born into a patrician family that confidently claimed direct descent from the goddess Venus. But by the time he came of age, his family had lost much of its wealth and political influence. He learned early on that in Rome, power belonged to those bold enough to seize it, and he possessed a level of audacity that bordered on insanity. There is a story from his youth that perfectly captures this. While sailing the Aegean Sea, a young Caesar was captured by ruthless Cilician pirates. The pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver. Caesar, deeply insulted by the low price, burst out laughing and demanded they ask for 50. During his captivity, he didn't cower or beg. He bossed the heavily armed pirates around, joined their athletic games, and constantly joked that once he was freed, he would return and crucify every last one of them. The pirates laughed at the arrogant Roman boy, but Caesar never joked about revenge. Once the ransom was paid and he was set free, he immediately raised a private fleet, hunted them down, and did exactly what he had promised. This was a man who believed his own myth long before anyone else did. In the treacherous snake pit of Roman politics, Caesar knew that military glory and unimaginable wealth were the only true paths to the top. He climbed the political ladder aggressively, heavily indebting himself to buy popularity with the common people. He threw lavish gladiatorial games, funded massive public banquets, and cultivated a powerful image as the champion of the plebeians. But he was playing an incredibly dangerous game. The conservative elites in the Senate despised him. They saw right through his charm, recognizing a dangerous ambition that threatened the very fabric of the Republic. To outmaneuver them, Caesar orchestrated a masterstroke. He formed a secret, illegal alliance with the two most powerful men in Rome. The first was Crassus, the richest man alive. The second was Pompey the Great, Rome's most celebrated and beloved general. Together, they formed the first triumvirate. It was a three-headed monster that effectively bypassed the Senate, allowing them to divide the Roman world among themselves like pieces on a chessboard. But Caesar was still the junior partner in this alliance. He lacked the immense wealth of Crassus and the legendary military record of Pompey. He needed a war. He needed gold. And most importantly, he needed an army loyal only to him. He secured the governorship of a province bordering Gaul, modern-day France, and immediately manufactured a reason to invade. What followed was a brutal, decade-long campaign of conquest that would make Caesar a living legend. He defeated massive tribal coalitions, built bridges across the Rhine River in a matter of days just to terrify the Germanic tribes, and even launched 2 daring invasions into the mysterious, mist-shrouded island of Britain. In the culminating Battle of Alesia, facing a united Gallic uprising led by Vercingetorix, Caesar found himself outnumbered and surrounded. His solution was military genius of the highest order. He built a wall around the Gallic fortress to starve them out, and then, incredibly, built another wall facing outward to defend his own army from a massive relief force. Against all odds, he crushed them both. During the Gallic Wars, Caesar slaughtered hundreds of thousands, enslaved 1 million more, and sent enough plundered gold back to Rome to completely shatter the local economy. His soldiers absolutely adored him. He ate the same rations they ate, marched in the mud where they marched, and addressed them not as soldiers, but as comrades. They were no longer the army of the Roman Republic. They were Caesar's army. While Caesar was conquering Gaul and building his legend, the political landscape in Rome completely collapsed. Crassus was killed in a disastrous, foolish military campaign in the east. The triumvirate was dead. Pompey, growing increasingly jealous and fearful of Caesar's rising star, aligned himself with the conservative Senate. The Senate, terrified of Caesar's immense popularity and his veteran army, issued a devastating decree. They ordered Caesar to disband his legions, give up his command, and return to Rome immediately as a private citizen. Caesar knew exactly what that meant. Without his political immunity and the physical protection of his army, his political enemies would immediately prosecute him, bankrupt him, and likely assassinate him. He was backed into a corner. On January 10, 49 BC, Caesar stood at the Rubicon. It was a minor, shallow river, but it marked the strict legal boundary of his province. By Roman law, any general who crossed it with a standing army committed high treason. The penalty was death. He paused on the bank. He thought about the bloodshed that would inevitably follow, and then, according to the ancient historians, he uttered the immortal words, "The die is cast." He urged his horse forward and crossed the water. The Roman Republic was dead the exact moment his horse's hooves touched the opposite bank. The crossing of the Rubicon ignited a massive, brutal civil war that ripped the entire Mediterranean world apart. Pompey and the Senate, caught entirely off guard by the lightning-fast speed of Caesar's advance, abandoned Rome and fled to Greece to raise an army. Caesar secured the capital, then relentlessly chased Pompey across the sea. The decisive clash came at Pharsalus. Despite being heavily outnumbered by Pompey's forces, Caesar's battle-hardened veterans completely crushed the senatorial army. Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping for sanctuary, but the young Egyptian king, trying desperately to win Caesar's favor, had Pompey assassinated the moment he stepped off his boat. When Caesar arrived in Egypt and was presented with the severed head of his greatest rival, he did not rejoice. He wept. Pompey was a fellow Roman, his former son-in-law, and a truly great man reduced to a pathetic, dishonorable end. Caesar's time in Egypt wasn't just about mourning, however. He quickly found himself embroiled in a local civil war and famously allied himself with the brilliant, captivating, and ruthlessly intelligent Cleopatra. Their romance is the stuff of legend, merging the unstoppable military might of Rome with the vast, ancient wealth of Egypt. After securing Cleopatra on her throne, Caesar spent the next few years mopping up the remaining senatorial forces across North Africa and Spain. He famously summarized one of his incredibly swift military victories in the East with just 3 simple words: "I came, I saw, I conquered." When Caesar finally returned to Rome, he was absolutely untouchable. There was no one left to oppose him. The Republic was a hollow shell, and he was the master of it all. He was appointed dictator for 10 years, and then, in a completely unprecedented move, dictator in perpetuity. Dictator for life. To the weary Roman populace, he was a glorious savior who had finally ended decades of endless civil wars. He pardoned many of his former enemies, relieved debt for the poor, initiated massive public building projects, and even reformed the calendar to create the Julian calendar that we largely still use today. But he also wore purple robes, sat on a gilded golden chair in the Senate, and had his own face stamped on Roman coins, an honor previously reserved only for gods and dead ancestors. To the surviving traditionalists in the Senate, these were the undeniable trappings of a king. And if there was one thing true Romans hated above all else, it was a king. A conspiracy began to form in the shadows. Over 60 senators, calling themselves the Liberators, decided that the only way to save the Republic was to cut off the head of the snake. They were led by Cassius and Brutus. Brutus was a complex figure, a man Caesar loved almost like a son, a man who had fought against Caesar at Pharsalus, but had been forgiven, pardoned, and elevated to high office. They planned to strike on the Ides of March, the 15th of March, 44 BC. On that fateful, misty morning, Caesar was warned by a seer to beware the Ides of March. His wife Calpurnia begged him not to leave the house after having a terrifying prophetic nightmare of him bleeding to death in her arms. But Caesar, perhaps believing his own myth of invincibility, or simply refusing to show weakness to his peers, went anyway. As he took his seat in the theater of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting that day, the conspirators crowded around his chair under the pretense of presenting a political petition. Suddenly, they drew their daggers. Caesar fought back like a cornered lion, blinding one attacker with his stylus, but there were simply too many. When he looked up through the chaos and saw Brutus among his attackers, with his dagger raised, the fight completely left him. He stopped struggling, pulled his toga over his head to die with dignity, and accepted his fate. He was stabbed 23 times, falling dead at the blood-stained base of a statue of his old rival, Pompey the Great. The assassins ran through the chaotic streets of Rome, holding their bloody daggers high, shouting to the crowds that the tyrant was dead and liberty was finally restored. But they had made a massive, fatal miscalculation. They had killed the dictator, but they had not killed his legacy. The Roman people did not cheer for liberty. They rioted in profound grief and overwhelming rage for their fallen champion. The republic the assassins tried to save was already a rotting corpse, killed years earlier by corruption, massive inequality, and the very armies meant to protect it. Caesar's death did not restore democracy. It simply plunged Rome into another, final, devastating civil war, emerging from the ashes not as a restored republic, but as an absolute empire ruled by his cold and calculating adopted son, Augustus. Julius Caesar crossed a small river and changed the trajectory of human history forever. He proved that no system of government is eternal, and that a mighty republic does not fall to a foreign conqueror, but to the overwhelming, unchecked ambition of the very men it creates. If you found this journey into the shadows of history fascinating, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling us which historical mystery or legendary figure we should cover next. Until then, remember that history is written by the victors, but the truth is usually hidden in the blood they shed.